Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this final plenary of the USR conference. I'm Julian Skyrme and I'm the Director of Social Responsibility at the University of Manchester, and we're delighted to be hosting this today. I'm going to be joined by some very esteemed colleagues, and we're going to be doing a panel presentation sharing some really exciting and interesting case studies from the University of Manchester. Before I tell you a little bit more about this, let me introduce some of my colleagues today, and hopefully their faces can appear to say hello and they can introduce themselves. So I wonder if we can bring in the face, first of all, of Dr. Jen O'Brien, who's going to be presenting in a moment. So if Jen can make herself known. I think there might be a delay in this, so maybe I'll do that for you. So the first person that will be joining me, I can see Jen's lovely face. Good morning, Jen.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
We're conscious, we'll say good morning, by the way. We realise it's good afternoon in Hong Kong and in lots of Asia. And if you're in in North America, it might be a very late night. And if you're watching on catch up, that's equally very good as well. We hope lots of people do that. Thanks, Jen. So we'll be seeing Jen in a moment. I'll be handing over to her. Also, I'd like to introduce Professor Raj Ariyaratnam. Raj, if you're about, please say good morning and good afternoon to everyone.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for some people.
Thank you, Raj. I've got everybody's faces. This is lovely. I don't feel like I'm just speaking to the whole world on my own from my own living room. I feel much better now. Really nice to see you, Raj. Thank you. I'll be handing over to Raj after Jen in a moment. The next person I want to introduce is Professor Jackie Carter. Say hello to everyone, Jackie. You're on mute, I think, Jackie.
Hello, everybody, whatever time of the day it is for you. Welcome. We're really looking forward to this panel.
Thanks, Jackie. And I'd like to finally, last by certainly no means least, introduce my colleague, Dr. Philip Drake as well. So Phil, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I won't say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. It just gets too confusing. So thank you for having us today, and I hope you enjoy the session that we're going to present. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. So I believe you can go back to my slide now, the kind person that's helping us out with everything for a slide view. I'm just going to say, just 2 minutes by way of context before we kick off with our case studies, what our approach is at the University of Manchester. And what I'm going to say now is a common feature you'll hear illustrated across each of the presentations that you see today. So the two pictures in the middle are probably the two most important documents that frame the discussion today. The first one is called Our Future, and that is the strategy of the University of Manchester. And in that strategy, we have three core goals. Firstly, we have a goal around research and discovery. We want to be one of the best research universities in the world, and that would be common to many universities like ours. I'm going to focus on research. That's goal number one. Goal number two is teaching and learning. Of course, that's the second great function all universities undertake, is to pass on knowledge to the future generations to enter the world of work and to become citizens and leaders of tomorrow that will hopefully improve the world we live in. That's goal number two. Goal number three for Manchester is something that's quite unique. Certainly we're not aware of another university in the UK, and maybe there's very few in the world that would have social responsibility as one of those core goals. And we have a commitment to social responsibility as our third core goal. And it's interesting when you think about those three core goals, research, teaching, and social responsibility. What we're going to be talking about today is really at that interface. If you imagine a Venn diagram that had the teaching goals of a university and the social responsibility goals, it's where those two things intersect. How can, in other words, the teaching and learning goals of a university advance the social responsibility agenda? How can teaching and learning contribute to making the world a better place, which essentially is what social responsibility speaks to? It thinks about the different functions of a university and how they benefit society. So that's our future, our strategy. You'll see to the left of that a diagram with 5 circles around there, and there are 5 priorities that we focus on. So we have a focus on inclusion, we have a focus on prosperity, a focus on environment, a focus on culture, and a focus on health. there are 5 big priorities that we're working towards at the University of Manchester. And the final diagram you see is just looking at the ways in which we can pursue those goals. So take environmental sustainability, or any issue for that matter, we can pursue it in 4 main ways. We can do it through our research, through our students, through our engagement with society, and through how we operate as a university. So that's just a bit by way of context in terms of how we're framing this discussion today. We're really zooming in on that interface around the role of our students and our social responsibility agenda. So we're really looking forward to sharing some case studies with you today. I'm going to try to keep everything to time with my colleagues, because they've got fascinating things to say, and we do need to make sure we get through this on time. So I'm perfectly on time now to hand over to my colleague Jen at 8:05 a.m. in the UK, I should say. And Jen's going to speak for 15 minutes on preparing students for the work of the world. Interesting play on words there, which I'm sure Jen will expand on in a moment. So Jen, please could I pass over to you to introduce our first case study today? Jen O'Brien.
Thank you, Julian, so much, and welcome everybody. It's a delight to be sharing some thoughts with you, whatever time it is in the world, wherever you might be at the moment. To frame our case study examples today, so we wanted to showcase with you the incredible work of colleagues across the university that was really bringing to the fore, epitomising, if you like, this approach that we have at the University of Manchester to social responsibility that speaks across all of our core agendas, our principles and our values. But I'm a critical theorist, I wanted just to reflect critically for a moment and actually bringing together a number of the threads across the discussions of the last 3 days at the USRN Summit, a little bit about what we mean, or how we use that term education. I've been in a number of forums recently where people have said, oh, education is a solution, our students will make it much better. I'm very honoured to be the academic lead for sustainability teaching and learning at the University of Manchester, and I also am a theme lead for our latest research platform, Sustainable Futures, and I work with colleagues across the university and with stakeholders outside, of course. And we often talk about education being the future. We must have students ready for employment. It's a very famous quote by Porritt, who is a chancellor at Keele University, who said, we must be preparing our students not just for the world of work, but for the work of the world. And I've been reflecting quite critically then about what that means through education in particular. And forgive a slightly fuzzy photograph here. I snuck this photograph cheekily during one of our graduation ceremonies. So this is the day when students put their gowns on and they parade down our Whitworth Hall, and watched by their friends and family. And I looked out and I saw this future. And we use that line often. Our students are the future thinkers, they're the future leaders, they're the future change makers. Certainly at the University of Manchester, as Julian framed, we're really proud of our students who do things. So as the heart of the Industrial Revolution, the place where the suffragette movement started, where we split the atom, we're really proud that our students do make a difference, often really quite practically as well. So they are the future professionals. We say this so often, a 40,000 strong force. I have said this, that's my very own work. But my argument is in that belief, the thinking about our students as future change makers, we perhaps less consider the power and the force that they have to affect change during their studies. So as I say, our students, massive change makers. This was a photograph of our students being involved in one of the climate strike protests that happened in Manchester. And it's really made me think critically about this idea of education. So SDG 4 there, quality education. What is quality education in terms of making a difference through social responsibility? And to reflect upon that for a moment, I wanted to use Orr's work that some of you might be familiar with. It's older now, this dates back to 1991, and Orr critiqued education more from the sustainability side and said it's worth noting that the destruction of the planet is not necessarily the work of ignorant people. Rather, it is largely the results of the work of people with BAs, BScs, LLBs, MBAs and PhDs. And he talks about education, if we are not careful, actually actively equipping individuals to be more effective vandals of the earth. His more recent work went on to say, in actual fact, unless we are aware of our education, the system that we are putting our students into, the way that we're equipping them, in actual fact, we could be doing more damage. And I've been playing with these ideas an awful lot recently around not just what we teach, but how we teach. So how our students are affecting change whilst they are with us during their studies and also when they go out into the world. And this is particularly significant because the student body is growing. So it's estimated that by 2040, there'll be 594 million students within the world. Really important in terms of growth of the higher education sector, but even more significant when we think then about the impact, positive or negative, that they could have. And as a little play around that, one of the ideas that Zoe Robinson, also at Keele, presented was this link between income and impact. So I'm sure many of you are aware of that Oxfam image on the bottom of the screen there, which very powerfully shows us that the richest 10% of the world actually are responsible for around 49% of carbon emissions. And there's a direct link there. Many of our students, very understandably, are aiming to get good jobs. If we then have this massive body of students, 594 million of them by 2040, we need to be really mindful that they are then going out into the world and affecting change while they're here with really good values. And I think also that's where we need to think critically. I'm in a British, and I'm going to say it, neoliberal education system, which is very much driven by in this case, marking criteria, by unit end surveys. We have to be very clear about our offer to students, for example. And over the years, I would argue that our education system has become so focused on students doing well. And of course, they want to. Many of them are making a huge investment for their degrees, particularly if they are overseas students. I'm really interested, though, in how we can move away from an education system that is focused on information and is much more driven by our students doing things, in this case, volunteering, by understanding, by applications of ideas, which then generates a much more, I would argue, lifelong learning, impactful approach to education. So I use, and to frame the case studies that we're going to share with you today, Education for Sustainable Development, also known as ESD, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This has been presented most recently by Advanced HE in the QAA in an updated format, and it's about empowering, informing and equipping our students as responsible actors and taking responsible action for environmental, economic and social society. It is a holistic, transformational education. What I particularly like about it is it also supports students as well as staff to develop the knowledge, but also the competencies and the abilities. And this is where I think working together, as I seamlessly hand over to my colleagues, is really quite powerful. So ESD is all about co-production and therefore within that co-benefit. So if we're thinking about how our students are learning as well as what, and we're thinking also then about the competencies and skills that they are gaining, not just information, we then have this really powerful, authentic way of learning that can then affect change. And if I may, within that, that is also a really powerful approach for academics. This is where I would like to say thank you to my co-presenters today, but also to us as a community. I work in sustainability. It's sometimes quite a thankless task. This is where I think your work is incredible and it is valued. And sometimes I think we underestimate the impact and the power that we have as academics. So to try and illustrate this theory, we're going to seamlessly hand over to three case studies from across the university that illustrate different ways in which our students are having impact in the world directly close to them through their studies, but also wider as well. So I'm going to hand over seamlessly now to Raj. He's going to pick up with an example of social responsibility in dental education.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Jen. And again, a good day for everybody, I think, in different parts of the world. I am Raj Ariyaratnam, and I'm attached to Manchester University and also leading the service learning for the faculty, co-leading the service learning for the faculty. So my talk is going to be a unique, a novel sort of concept, humanizing dentistry, and then I will tell you the case study and then how we develop this particular one. Jen, can I get the next slide, please? Thank you. The University of Manchester is a civic university, is founded on the civic engagement principle nearly about 200 years ago, and still continued to prioritize social responsibility act as a core value, as Julian mentioned before. Next slide, please. And this is our present president and vice chancellor, Dame Nancy, and then she's very much interested as a social responsibility as a third core value in addition to teaching and learning and research. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the university's 5-year plans for 2021 to 25, you can see again the knowledge, wisdom, and humanity. The humanity is taking equal status with other two, wisdom and knowledge. Yeah, the next slide, please. And this is where we are aligned with the university strategic plan, the humanizing dentistry in Manchester. How this humanizing dentistry concept developed, I think when we looked at as educator, with me and other global educators, we looked at the present curriculum developments all over the world. Things are moving, but the curriculums are heavily weighted towards what you call economic development, economic enrichment. And then most of the educators' concern is we are lacking in human development in the curriculum preparation. And also in particular in dentistry, we were concerned the dentistry moving towards very heavily on technical side of studies and education in the curriculum rather than the humanistic. If you don't correct this part, our concerns, we are going to produce more technical experts and technicians in dentistry rather than the dental professionals. So that's why we wanted to introduce humanity into the dental curriculum as much as possible to rebalance the curriculum dentistry in Manchester. So we started this particular concept called Humanizing Dentistry of Manchester, HDM. Next slides, please. So we define in a say, the sort of mission is to create and promote a learning environment in which our students will have the freedom and space. We are not forcing on the student. This is the beauty of Manchester. We are creating the environment for students to lead, the students to co-create, as Jen mentioned. So our curriculum, we are more emphasizing on co-creating, and also we want to produce socially responsible graduates and global citizens. Next slide, please. So this is, I attended a students' global conference last year, organized by Harvard and Tufts universities. This is the McJennett Global Citizens Award ceremony. And the student was so striking, the students' main opinion in the conference, these are all representative from all over the world. The university curricula are heavily weighted on economic enrichment, lacking human development. That's again supporting our concept, the humanizing dentistry. Next one, please. So initially, that is about a few years ago, we developed the humanizing dentistry supported by two themes, the volunteering and service learning. Again, service learning, when I looked at the literature, there are more than 140 definitions. So it's very, very broad area, so people can interpret it in a different way. Sorry. So this is the one I liked it, the structured learning experience community in which service combined with learning adds value to each and transform both. So what striking is, it's not just one particular part is benefiting from this particular process. So when the students are engaging with the community, both sides particularly benefit equally. That is the one I like, this particular one. So based on this, we developed something slightly more simple in Manchester. Next slide, please. A symbiotic engagement between the community and the students. The symbiotic, by definition, is the symbiotic exercise where both sides or both stakeholders tend to get equal, more or less equal benefit. So that's the one we are working on, this symbiotic engagement between community and the students. Next one, please. And then again, this is a sort of area we are expanding on, that service learning is an active and positive symbiotic engagement exercise between the students and the community, in which all participants are expected to benefit equally. So we have defined the service learning in that particular one, and then we are developing our service learning theme and concept and strategic plan in Manchester at presently. Next one, please. So as you know, the benefits of the service learning, this is where we are really wanted to be connecting learning to emotional experience. As Jen mentioned, that it's not just gathering information. The students need to understand or need to engage with the world. So in a way, when we learn something with the emotional experience attached to it, there is a lot of literature confirm the understanding become more deeper, and then the students started to critically think, and also that's developed cognitive development. And then our students are working in multicultural communities, so the intercultural interactive skills develop, community awareness and knowledge, and also we produce enhanced community to public service. Next one, please. So the community, I think from our projects which we are doing, we found the empowerment of the community in health education, or the health, mainly oral health, because of mainly the dentistry side. And then students became role models for the community's younger generation. And then also we were able to identify research community projects and in relation between academic institutions and the community. Sorry about my light, I think we're saving slides for the environment sustainability. So focus on the community problem. Next slide, please. Okay, so the service learning project we are doing at the moment, and as a dental students are concerned, we set up emergency dental clinics in our hospital so that people can walk through the door. These are the people who can't afford to pay for the dental treatments. These are the low-income people, homeless people, refugees, and those people walk through, and then the students treat them under the supervision of our teachers. And also we set up outreach clinics in the low-income and hard-to-reach community areas, in conjunction with the NHS, our National Health Service. So the students are treating the patients under the supervision of National Health Service dentist or community dentist. And also we encourage our students to go around the world with some global structured volunteering and the low and middle income countries, and supervision of the local dentist. Has been carefully structured program, and then through that also students have become engaged with the community through service learning projects. And then finally, the first language project. I mean, this is a very interesting and unique project for the Manchester. I will come to that a little later. Next slide, please. And these are the widening participation schemes we are doing with the local schools. Our students go to the local schools and mix with the students and then give them oral health education, and also talks about higher education, encouraging them, supporting them, mentoring them. Next one, please. And then this is our students to go to our local homeless centers, and then they helping and also giving basic health education to the homeless people, and then making a bond with those people. This is again, as I mentioned before, the emotional experience. It will allow the students to commit themselves and also understand the education better, because normally in classrooms, we normally talk about binary education, either black or white or this or that, and we treat this disease that will disappear, or we'll cut down the sugar, the caries will be reduced. But that's not exactly the real world working, isn't it? There's a lot of gray matters between the black and white. So when they work in this sort of environment, the students learn about the three-dimensional education and the life experience. And when they connect together, their understanding become much better. Next one, please. The first language project is a unique project for Manchester. We developed recently. Manchester is a multicultural city. There are about 145 plus languages spoken in the Manchester community. And then we looked at the Manchester University. We are having students from more than 135 different countries. what we did actually, we identified students with the bilingual skills or multilingual skills, connected them with the same community in Manchester. So through that, they'll be able to bypass the language barrier and able to educate or pass the information or knowledge sharing with the local community. At the same time, the students become role models and mentors for the local community's younger generation. And by that, both communities, both stakeholders actually benefited. Our students become more aware about the different ethnic mix in Manchester that will help them to practice dentistry in the future. At the same time, the community become getting more health education, and they are connected to the local university, and the younger generations are getting more benefit. In fact, about 6 students enter the medical school from that community after they interact with our university. Next one, please. And this is the first language press. This is how we can see our students are connecting not only the elderly, the adult people, in the younger people. So that's a unique experience you won't get in the classroom learning. Thank you. Next one, please. So this is the group that's ended. You can see they are not only, they are also composition of the students are from different communities, different ethnic background. So then they get together, they share the experience, they learn more. This is the first language project actually. And then we expanded that to now different communities. Next slide, please. This is to the Chinese community. Then we had talked about the pregnant women. Our students engage with the pregnant women and their grandparents in their own language to talk about the oral health, oral hygiene during the pregnant times and all the first 1,000 days of the child. Next one, please. So, and on this side, the local one, then we expanded that in the globally. Then our students, with the good preparation and support, they're going around the world. This is the one is in Cambodia. Next one, please. And this again is the Cambodia, different parts of Cambodia. And in the Cambodia, through the very respected association, we make the students supervised by the local dentist, and then they'll be involved in oral health education in the local people in Cambodia. Okay, next one, please. Yeah, this is again, you can see the story about one of the cases here in this particular one. That particular day, the students said they were heavy rain, so they put up the stages outside. Then the local people arranged the kids to come and see the dentist for the oral screening. So you can see the emotional attachment and how they react to the challenges. This again, you can't teach in the classrooms. They need to get out of the world because professionals, our students, are going to be global ambassadors in the future. This is where the Manchester is really putting emphasis on. Next one, please. And this is our students went to Kenya and then giving the health education to the local community again. The local children, they're bonding with them and then they're staying closer to them. They understand their lives. So that gives a different dimension of education for our students about the global knowledge, global people, global spread. Because as I said, Manchester and the UK have a multi-ethnic, multicultural country. So when they practice in different parts of the world, as a part of the country, they'll be able to apply those experiences they gathered from different parts of the world. Next one, please. And this is the reflection of the students. As I said, service learning is 2 parts in it. One is the community, the other one the students. Then the reflective learning is part of the students' benefit. So they come and do the reflection after their courses. And these are some of the examples how the students reflect. Okay, next one, please. And this is the community. Initially, the patients were a little reluctant, were treated by the students. Then they, throughout their experience, they become more and more confident. They're creating the trust. This is another thing. As a clinician, we need to connect with the people, but then only we can create the trust. This particular community programs allow that to make how to connect with the people, and this is how the patients become more responding to them. And through these programs, for the last 10 years, we treated our students, treated and oral health education for nearly about 140,000 people for the last 12 years, and also 1,000 students involved in this particular outreach community program. And also our students went up to 15 different countries before pre-COVID, about 150 students, and then brought all the experience. Then we thought, when they bring all this experience, we need to create them a platform for them to practice or reflect on that. That's how, next slide, please. That's why we created Denman platform. It's a global oral health forum. We have meetings, we have annual conferences. The students and staffs who went on volunteering and service learning come back and tell their stories and then share the experience to inspire future generations. Next one, please. And this is the Denman, is the platform to reflect and share the experience with peers and staffs. Next one, please. So Denman Society, initially the Denman is created by the staff, and then now we hand it over to the students. This is again what we said, is a co-creation. Manchester is very much emphasized on co-creation. So this particular Denman, platform now is fully run by the students, and the Denman Society is running it. Next one, please. So these are how we disseminate this, what the students experience. There are different ways. We do conferences, we do presentations, newsletters, video clips, and we're using electronic blackboards. And then also the university supported this program, giving what we call Making a Difference Awards. They identify, recognition, and rewarding them. And also we are fortunate enough to won the McGennet Global Award 2 years ago. Next one, please. So the social responsibility through HDM to become the lead, this is what the strategic plan for us as a dental side is, that to become a leading dental school in the country for social responsibility, again, wider recognition for our students' global citizenship. Next one, please. And the human dentistry in Manchester. So humanizing dentistry, this is our new narrative. HDM will create and promote a learning environment in which students have the freedom and space to develop and internalize. This is very important. Internalize civic possibilities and environmental consciousness while building on their scientific knowledge and skill competency. So what we are doing is we are rebalancing the curriculum. While they are getting on with the technical side of dentistry, we wanted to integrate and embed the social civic responsibility and environmental consciousness. Next one, please. So the Division of Dentistry, this plan, our strategic plan, is supported by, initially by 2 themes like voluntary and service learning. Now you can see we supported by 4 pillars. In addition to volunteering and service learning, we also environmental sustainability, and now recently we add equality, diversity, and inclusion. So in the next 5 years, our programs, the humanizing dentistry, will be supported by these 4 pillars, or what we call theme. Through that, we are going to arrange programs. Next one, please. So this is the 5-year strategic plan, and then you can see on the last part of it is called Students Pledge Passport. This is where we are encouraging the students to record and document all the projects they are doing, and then that will be authorized by the university, and then they can take them with that as a portfolio when they leave the university. That will help them to reflect on that, and also job employability, and also future careers and awards. Next one, please. So this is our late Vice Chancellor, or inaugural Vice Chancellor of the University of Manchester. He said, producing graduates who will be responsible global citizens is now more critical than ever. This he said nearly about 15 years ago, but now is more appropriate than ever. Actually, that's why the humanizing dentistry is set on that particular path, and the University of Manchester fully supporting this particular case history. Next one, please. Thank you. So that's all about humanizing dentistry. we will keep on updating you in the future how we are traveling on this particular journey. Thank you. Jen, back to you. Jen.
Thank you, Raj, ever so much for a truly fascinating case study presentation there. It's my honour now to hand over to Jackie, Professor Jackie Carter, who's going to share with us a little bit about her work in and around data. Jackie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm not on mute now, am I? Good. So you can all hear me. It's a real pleasure to be here today to speak about my work alongside my esteemed colleagues, but I really want to welcome any thoughts you might have on what we all have to say. And my contact details are on the slide here. Just to give a little bit of background, I'm going to be talking about learning by doing. So I'm going to be picking up on the theme that we've already heard something about here at the University of Manchester.
Recording stopped. Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
And I am going to be
recording in progress.
How the University of Manchester Data Fellowship Programme, which I have led, is changing lives. So thank you, Jen. If we could have the next slide, please. Okay, if you want to go away and read about my work after this presentation, I've provided some links here, both to papers that I've recently written. So the papers on the right-hand side are open access, so anybody can view those. There's no firewall to see them. And then on the left-hand side, I've presented the front screen of my book there called Work Placements, Internships and Applied Social Research. I'm very proud of my book. It was my lockdown baby. I wrote it during lockdown. And I wrote the book because it occurred to me that what I was learning and what my students were telling me, some of which I'm going to tell you about today, in terms of the experiences they were having through the Data Fellowship Programme, was worth sharing globally. And I do know that other universities have picked up on the work that we are doing at Manchester and are thinking about implementing it at their own institution. And then the other photograph on this slide is a booklet that I've produced recently where I've spoken to 18 alumni of the University of Manchester, all of whom have done social science degrees, either at bachelor's level, master's or PhD. And they have all told me what they're doing now in their job and how their degree equipped them to be able to do the work they're doing now. And the theme of that booklet is policy. So all of the 18 people I interviewed were in policy roles, and they are all telling me about what they're doing so that I can share with my current students what a possible future might look like. And that also is being shared widely. So they are the presentation, sorry, they're the publications on which my presentation rests today. And just before I move to the next slide to say, we've just done some work with Latin America, with Mexico, Colombia and Brazil, in which we're testing the viability of the model you're about to hear about, this data fellowship model in Latin America, to enable their students to be able to be more socially responsible, also work with their communities, and to help deliver the UN SDGs. So thank you, Jen. Next slide. So I'm sure you've heard a lot about SDGs in this conference, and this is an audience, of course, that is almost defined by the SDG wheel, the 17 goals there. And SDGs, to be delivered well, need data literate, data trained people. So we are also using the SDGs to frame a lot of the work we're doing. We don't specifically teach to the SDGs as an agenda, but for example, I teach a first year course to undergraduate students on inequalities and how to measure them from the global to the local. So the SDGs clearly features large in that. Thank you, Jen. Next slide. Okay, and one of the things that we are doing at Manchester, and you have already heard about, is creating that link between the world of education and higher education in particular, and the industry, the world of work that our students will graduate into at some point in the future. And we're doing that by bringing our knowledge of the careers that the students could graduate into our teaching. And so everything you're going to hear about from me today is about building that link bridging the gap between industry and education, and doing that in a very theoretical way, but also a very applied and practical way. Thank you, Jen. Next slide. So in terms of the University of Manchester and our data fellowship goals, there's a couple of pieces of information I'm going to give you by way of background. So this initiative started in 2013, and it was actually funded by UK central government, who had done an awful lot of research on the quantitative skills gap in the pipeline into careers in social research generally. So the UK government pumped funding into the sector. The University of Manchester won some of that funding. It was a competitive process, and we created a Centre of Excellence at the University of Manchester in order to help teach our undergraduate social science students how to do quantitative analysis and quantitative research. And the role that I played in that at Manchester was to develop this 8-week-long, 2-month-long data-driven research projects in which students were placed into host organizations to do data-driven research for those 2 months. So they were taken out of the classroom where they had been given quantitative research skills, put into the workplace, paid to do that, and then came back and told us through their reflective diaries, which I don't dwell on here, but all the case studies come from their reflective diaries, how they developed their skills, their networks, their knowledge, and their experience. And since the programme started at Manchester back in 2013, and we placed our first data fellows in 2014, we have now placed 330 data fellows from that programme into about 65 different organisations that represent the public and the private sector, and also volunteer, the third sector. Of those 330 data fellows that we've placed, I'm hugely proud to say that every year we've had 70% of those be female. And that's not because we have 70% of females who are applying. We don't, it's 50-50, but 70% of females have applied, and 25% of those 330 have been from historically underrepresented backgrounds. So we really are developing this diverse talent pipeline and giving all of our students, regardless of their socioeconomic background, the opportunity to be engaged in this truly prestigious programme, which I will share more about next. So where do they go? Jen, if you can move the slide on, please. Thank you. Here's a slide. It's a little bit out of date now, but it gives lots of the logos of the types of organisations that our students are placed into. So one of the things the students always say, and the reason why they apply for this programme, is because it's going to help them differentiate themselves from their peers, because they will have the opportunity, if they're successful, to go into, for example, a government department, or you can see the BBC on there. We've got several government departments. We've got lots of organisations who do data-driven research. We've got polling companies. We've got research companies. We've got universities. We've got organisations like the Pankhurst Trust, who do a lot of work around gender inequality. And it's a vast array of organisations who want to give an opportunity to our students to do a piece of data-driven research in their teams. And it really is a win-win process, because not only do our students get this amazing opportunity to practice their data skills, but these organisations are opening their doors to our students to give them a real-world experience of being in an organisation which cares about doing data-driven research. So it's imperative to us that the organisations that we work with are giving our students the opportunity to put their skills into practice, but in organisations that really care deeply about society. So I'll move on, please, Jen, to the next slide. Thank you very much. And why does all of this matter? Well, we've talked about education through Jen's presentation. We've heard about certain skills through the last presentation, but 21st century skills for the workplace require graduates who are not just trained in a specific technique, but are able to transfer what they're trained in at university, their critical thinking skills, their analytical things, skills, their research, and are able to apply those to a whole range of issues that matter, that affect the world in a global and a local way. So one of the reasons that social science, humanities and arts people, shape people, are good for the world of work is because they are critical thinkers, and they have the opportunity at the 3 years at university to really think deeply about the issues that we're all facing. And then if they acquire some of the skills that the workplace requires, they also have the opportunity to go into really interesting future careers. So work placements and internships play a part in that. And it helps students both strengthen their skills by using them in a practical way, as is said here, as well as helping them find career pathways in which they can thrive. And certainly the data fellowships open their eyes to career pathways that they may never have known existed. And we have time after time our students coming back and telling us they didn't even know this job existed, and it's something they really would like to think about doing now. Next slide, please, Jen. Okay, so in my book, one of the things I've done is developed a skills framework. So on this slide here, which I just want to show you briefly, I've developed a set of research skills, 5 research skills, and a set of analytical skills that are relevant to the data fellowships for social science students. So this basket of skills was taken from a British Academy report based on the previous slide. And I've adapted it so we can use it as a basis for our students to monitor, to both baseline and monitor their skills development while they're in the workplace. But as I said earlier, it's not just about the research and analytical skills, it's about the real world skills sought by employers, the professional skills. So I've looked to industry, and I've taken McKinsey reports and LinkedIn reports and looked at the top 7 skills that they look for in early career professionals and listed them here. And the reason I've done all of that is because in the Data Fellowship Programme, all of the students have the opportunity to reflect at the beginning and the middle and the end of their Data Fellowship. And I use this as a framework to help them think about what they are developing in the workplace and what it was like when they went in, what it was like in the middle, and what it was like when they come out. And that gives them a record that they can then refer to in the future, and they can use when they're applying for further study or future job opportunities. So this framework is starting to be informing my own teaching, and in fact my colleagues' teaching. We're starting to embed this into our employability within the curriculum, because students don't know much about the workplace before they go into it. So it's a real helpful tool and guide to give them that structure. Thank you, Jen. Next slide. So I talked about alumni, and these are a few extracts from that alumni brochure that I talked about students that have graduated and gone into policy roles. And the reason I've done this, as I said, is so that I can show my current students why they might be studying what they're studying, why they're reading so many texts, why they're having to synthesize different ideas from different scholars, different schools of thoughts, different paradigms, why they might be learning skills that they don't think will have relevance in their future, but will. And by giving them their peers of the future words, it really brings to life the value of their degree. So this slide is just really capturing some of what's coming out of those interviews. And I'm going to do the next one on careers in research. And then I've got another one lined up on careers in data analysis. Thank you, Jen. So now I'm going to give you the story of 5 data fellows. So I'm going to embed 5 case studies into this case study. And as I say, I'm able to do this because I collect information from all of my data fellows and those 330 people that have gone through the program. I could very quickly reach out to most of them because I'm still connected to most of them. But here's just a handful to highlight some of what I claimed at the beginning of this talk about data fellowships changing lives. So if you could move on to the next slide, Jen, please. I've got a huge smile on my face on this slide because Giuseppe, 7 years ago this week, was at the World Bank. And here he is on this slide, standing outside the World Bank with his lecturer on the left-hand side there, his lecturer at the University of Manchester, who taught him politics, and me on the right-hand side. And we were there with Giuseppe when he went to present the results of his data fellowship to the World Bank. And Giuseppe had done one of the first remote data fellowships. So he'd actually been commissioned by the World Bank through his data fellowship. I say commissioned, he wasn't commissioned by them. He got the data fellowship project, but he was doing work that they needed doing. And he was looking at their Open Knowledge Foundation, their Open Knowledge, I think it's foundation, the work that they make available openly on open access. And he was looking at South-South cooperation. So he was actually looking at which countries in the Global South were actually using the knowledge base that the Open Bank were making, the World Bank were making available openly. And he did a tremendous piece of work for them, and he went over and presented it. So Giuseppe was one of our first, he was in the second year of the data fellowship, but he was in one of our first students to do an international placement. And he now is working, and the reason why I'm so happy to report on Giuseppe's progress, he's now working in sustainable finance. So he works for a startup company, a small startup company. He's a senior data scientist. He did his first degree in politics, and he's now a senior data scientist. So it goes to show that, you know, you can traverse disciplines. And he is now taking on current data fellows and supporting them. So this summer, he had 2 of our data fellows, and they were so good and did such a valuable piece of work for his organization that he's kept them in post. So they're now doing temporary roles whilst they're finishing. They've come back to finish their final year. So here's just one example of those 330 stories where a student had his head turned by his own data fellowship, used it to then go on and get his master's degree and go into the world of work in sustainable finance, and is now supporting the program through taking in data fellows. So it creates this beautiful virtuous circle, and that's just one of many stories. Next one, please. So a little bit more recently, Niamh and Philippe, who I'm still in touch with. I've recently interviewed Niamh, and I'm still in touch with Philippe. Philippe was one of the stories in the booklet I shared with you. And Niamh and Philippe both went to an organization called Open Data Watch, which was based in Washington, DC. And they each did tremendous work looking at gaps in the Sustainable Development Goals in terms of data availability. So Niamh did a really important piece of work looking at gender data gaps globally by scouring many websites and finding out what data were available and what were missing and where there were gaps, and therefore where there would be shortfall in countries reporting against the SDGs, particularly for the gender data. And Philippe did a tremendous piece of work. And again, he stayed in touch with the organization he had done his work placement with, and has since gone on to do a master's degree from which he's just graduated, and is now looking for a role which combines his interests and his skills. So again, these 2 students have their heads turned by doing the data fellowship, both again from social science degrees. Thank you, Jen. The next slide, please. You can hear my voice is a bit croaky. I'm sorry, everybody. I've got a bit of a sore throat today. Beth is a more recent graduate. So Beth went into an organization in 2021. She graduated last year. I was at her graduation. Like Jen, it's just such a huge pleasure to sit on the stage and watch our students receive their certificates after all their hard work and see what they say about what they've gained from their time at Manchester. And Beth did a piece of work around EDI for a research organisation in the UK, and she has now gone on to do a master's in social research methods and statistics, again here at the University of Manchester. Beth was a student who was not sure what she wanted to do with her degree, but again used a data fellowship to really hone in on what she was interested in and has used that to good effect. So the last example, if I may please, Jen. Oh, the last 2 examples are more recent. So Georgia did her data fellowship at the Manchester City Council, so this is more local. And look at her words there. I can confidently say that being a data fellow matched my initial expectations, which were mainly improving confidence and skills in a STEM sector and getting work experience in a positive and inspiring environment, and greatly exceeded them. And she was really adored by the organisation she went into. So you can only see a peep on the left-hand slide there. But when she left, after just 8 weeks, she got people writing to her and giving her a card and a present to say how much they appreciated the work that she had done with them. And we find this time and time again, our organisations really love to have bright, fresh minds and an extra pair of hands to help them do some of the work that otherwise might not get done. And very finally, and then I'll move on to the end, I wanted to say something about using role models. So we hear a lot about role models, particularly in data careers, because it is still heavily dominated, or tech and data careers are heavily dominated by males. And one of the things I try to do is bring to the attention of my students women who have gone into data careers. And I'm one. I'm a woman in data career. I've actually got a national accolade called for women in data back in 2020. But here's somebody, Adriana, who is really rattling cages, and she's a rising star. And I use her as a role model to show our students that with a social science background, you can still go into incredibly interesting careers using data and tech. So Adriana featured in my book as a vignette, which is why she appears on this slide here. Okay, I'm just about ready to wrap up. So on the penultimate slide, if I may, please, Jen. One of the things that the students gain, obviously, as I hope I've shown you, is skills. So they put their skills that they've learned in the classroom into practice in the workplace. And 8 weeks is a quite substantial amount of time to practice those skills. And they really do come out the other side being experts in some case, both in programming languages and also using the data that they previously had not had access to. And here's just one quote from one of those students. I feel a lot more confident in myself, my degree, and my abilities. And that just sums up really the 330 that have gone through the program. The skills you have and learn on a data fellowship are way more important than the title of your degree. So our students tend to focus on the degree they've come to study, but the data fellowship helps them understand the relevance and applicability of that degree to the world of work, and particularly in the socially responsible way that we've been talking about here. And I've got my own quote, which I want to read out for you. This is from Michelle Obama, and I use this in my book. Through my education, I didn't just develop skills. I didn't just develop the ability to learn, but I developed confidence. And I think confidence is one of the most important things that we can give our students, to give them the opportunity to enter the workplace when they graduate and to be those socially responsible citizens we encourage them to be. So my very final slide, if I may, Jen, please, is an adaptation of my first slide. So I called my talk Learning by Doing, but I don't think it's just about learning by doing. I think it's learning by doing and reflecting. We need to give our students opportunity to reflect. And I've talked about how I do that with the data fellowships. And I've changed the subtitle of my slide because I believe this absolutely, completely and utterly, how the University of Manchester is changing lives, in my case, one data fellowship at a time. And I thank you very much for listening today, and I'll hand back to Jen. Thank you, everyone.
My goodness, what an absolutely powerful example of changing lives and indeed changing the world through data. Thank you, Jackie, ever so much for sharing such a rich experience with us. Last, but by absolutely no means least, it is my complete honour to welcome Dr. Philip Drake, who's going to share with you a different educational setting. So he's going to share with you the impact that the law programme is having for social responsibility for the next 15 minutes or so before we open the floor to questions. So thank you, Phil, very much.
Thanks, Jen, and thank you all for having me here today to present to you about our experience in law in the University of Manchester. Lots of fantastic things have been said to you already about what we're doing at the University of Manchester. We do have social responsibility as one of our three aims. However, getting away from a neoliberalist perspective for education is extremely difficult, even with that kind of aim as one of our main priorities. So basically what I'm saying is, in order to try, it's not countering it, but to have any potential influence, my experience is it's necessary to try to design and structure the education in a specific way to get students thinking in a different way that they may already have done in relation to their undergraduate degree. So I'm going to talk through with you what I've done with a specific program and what I've done with a specific module, and I'll start with a module. But before I do, it's a very practical guide I'm giving you. I'm not throwing any theory at you at the moment. I'm quite happy to discuss theory, but I thought, given the limited time I've got, I'm sticking to almost what we're actually doing on the ground. So next slide, Jen, please. So the Law in Practice course started in 2018. And as part of this course, students have to undertake a real-life legal advice centre case where they provide legal advice to individuals. And these individuals are people who would otherwise be unable to access any other form of legal help or assistance. And they do it under the supervision of a volunteer lawyer or an academic with professional experience. So the students learn as part of this course the skills you would expect them to learn, such as interviewing, researching, letter writing. But importantly on the course, they approach practice in the law from a critical standpoint. They're not encouraged to think like lawyers. We hear all the time, oh, think like lawyers. We tell them, don't think like lawyers. We challenge them to think like clients. How does this client feel in this situation? And we also encourage them to consider on a more macro level the social, political, and economic structures that influence the law, and its often detrimental impact on the most vulnerable, disadvantaged, and marginalized in society. Law can often be taught in a very sterile environment without these kind of influences being even taken into account. So the first major lesson that a lot of our students learn, particularly through their work in the Legal Advice Centre, is that there is often no homology between the law and justice. The two things are very, very separate and distinct. As part of the course, the students are encouraged to reflect. So going back on what Jackie's been talking about, reflection is integral to the course. And we ask the students to reflect upon micro, meso, and macro levels about what is happening in their case and what is happening in the law. And we ask them to think critically about accepted norms and values. We ask them to welcome diversity and to question stereotypes. Is this right? And to have this narrative imagination to understand value and empathize with others' perspectives. So, for example, we explore how a formalistic, narrow focus on rules by a lawyer in a client meeting can be destructive to the client's own personal narrative. The client comes to the meeting with what's important to them. That might not necessarily be relevant to the law, but by discarding that, it can have the impact and effect of basically destroying them, that client's narrative. So in line with Martha Nussbaum's values for a liberal education, that's not a neoliberal, a liberal education, we call this an experiential liberal education. And our Made in Manchester student philosophy, which I'll come back to later when we talk about the wider programme. So students consider the formalistic, hierarchical and subordinate nature of the law. They look and consider its servitude to financial capital and its inaccessibility to many, particularly those who are disadvantaged and vulnerable. As part of the course, we expose the students to different theoretical positions and hope to create a different, deeper, more critical lens for them to observe the world. Importantly, they construct their own ideas of not just what the law is, but what it does, and also what it ought to do. So next slide, please, Jen. The course is undertaken in a workshop format, and in recognition of the confidence and anxiety issues which many undergraduate students face, we try to gradually build the students' confidence, or at the very least, develop their image of self-confidence so they can project that they're confident even if they don't feel confident, which I'm sure a lot of people here can relate to, as can I. The course starts with quite structured workshops, with me disseminating information and giving them tasks to complete in small groups. They then feed these tasks in the small groups back to the main group, which builds to the students autonomously presenting individually or in small groups on their reflections and issues of access to justice. So one of the drawbacks of the course are that it is based around live clients. It's one of the advantages of the course, but it's also one of the drawbacks. So we're restricted in the numbers of students we can who can access a course, and we do have to set a cap, unfortunately. So this course often fills up as an option. Generally, the options go live on the computer system, and generally within an hour of it going live, we have students fitting, students meeting the cap, and which is this year 70 students. So we have 35 students in semester 1 and 35 students in semester 2. However, from September next year, we'll also be starting, well, from September this year, we started a new curriculum, and on the second year of the course, we're going to be providing a simulated client course for law students, which will be uncapped, and we get over this inability to be able to extend it to everybody. So it will be extended to everybody in a year, and we expect up to around 300 students taking part in this simulated course. So next slide, please, Jen. So I do, my apologies, you can't see this little right, and I didn't realize how the screen would be lit, but I apologize. I will explain the boxes which are surrounding what we want to be at the centre, the Made in Manchester law student, what we want that law student to leave Manchester with. So as part of a new undergraduate law curriculum, social responsibility and ethics will be incorporated into all the modules on a degree. So every single module on the degree, every 30 credit module, every 20 credit module has to have an element of social responsibility and ethics in it. It can be a formative, it can be a session, it can be a lecture. They all have to have social responsibility and ethics as part of the module. And they have to highlight it to the students. We're talking about social responsibility and ethics here. It's part of your undergraduate learning. This is what we're going to talk about. I mean, commercial lawyers said to me, well, how can we talk about social responsibility and ethics in commercial law? I said, Amazon, you know, taxes being paid, other things. I mean, it's you know, it's a fantastic opportunity to discuss social responsibility and ethics. Anyway, so going back to our Made in Manchester law student, you'll see the bubbles surrounding the main bubble, and these are our 6 principles for teaching social responsibility and ethics in the new undergraduate law degree. So our first bubble is exploring understandings of justice, its connection to law, and a critical appreciation of access to justice. So we've exposed to the students, there's different forms of justice. You may have been taught procedural justice as part of the law degree, but there's many other forms of justice, such as social justice, distributive justice, restorative justice, many other types. And actually in the UK, we've suffered over the last 8 years massively from withdrawal of legal aid. So the poorest in society quite often, and low earners, just don't have any access to the legal system because they can't access legal representation. And in the UK, we operate an adversarial system, so it's wholly unfair if you're going up against somebody who's legally represented and you can't afford legal representation yourself. So those are just some of the things, one of the principles. The second principle is embedding socially responsible values throughout the curriculum through, for example, a discussion of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and their application at local, national and global levels. So Jackie showed you the diagram, but I mean, discussing about no poverty, zero hunger, reducing inequalities and climate action. Those are just 4 of the 17 United Nations goals. Our third principle is promoting an understanding of the issues at the intersection between ethical conduct and legal rules. And I often give the students a quadrant to look at, and in each quadrant has a wordplay on ethics and legality. So in the top quadrant, we have what is ethical and legal. And in the bottom right quadrant, we have what is unethical and illegal. And these are easy to deal with. If it's ethical and legal, you do it. If it's unethical and illegal, you don't do it. But in the other two quadrants are the ones which you need to really think about, where you have things which are unethical and legal. So for example, when lawyers petitioned in America to make torture legal in Guantanamo Bay, it was legal what they were doing, but what they were doing is unethical. And also in the other quadrant, what is ethical and illegal. So in the UK, we have a number of campaigners who've been holding up one of our main motorways, campaigning against climate action and, well, not campaigning against climate action, campaigning for climate action. And they've got a really, really bad press, but then exposing to the students, well, actually, the suffragettes from Manchester, you know, the civil rights movement, when they were initially coming forward, they had really bad press. People were saying, why are these people doing this? You know, why don't they just stay at home and stop disrupting everybody's lives? But now, in historical terms, we look back and say, what fantastic movements they were. So we're exposing students to that kind of discussion. Our fourth principle is promoting a critical appreciation of the contextualized nature of law. And in particular, the extent to which law can reinforce inequalities at local, national and international levels. And I've already mentioned how it can disproportionately impact on the most vulnerable, disadvantaged and marginalized. And we talk about non-disclosure agreements and other kind of things where the rich and powerful can silence people. So the principle 5 is promoting a contextual appreciation of the law at a micro level as it impacts upon specific individuals, at a meso level as it impacts upon communities, and a macro level from a societal perspective. And we consider the human side of law beyond legal rules. In many legal discussions, both in the classroom and in the law firms with clients, individuals can sometimes become a conceptual abstract to the actual legal problem. And we're bringing the individuals and their narrative back into importance. And a final principle is promoting a culture of interaction, connection, and inclusivity. So in law, it's very, very well documented. Law students and the culture of law is very competitive with very little teamwork. And research, largely coming from America, shows this approach can be detrimental to the well-being of students. Their actual well-being, a longitudinal study was carried out by Sheldon and Krieger, and it showed that law students came in with a normal level of well-being, and in the first year, it massively deteriorated. And that's from taking the context out of law, that's from taking teamwork out of law, that's increasing competition. And what we're trying to do is complete opposite and promote interaction and the students to connect and work together. So next slide, Jen, please. So what do we hope to achieve from this? Well, what we hope to achieve from these principles is we want our students to graduate with these kind of elements which form a core of our students. And that's an understanding that justice isn't one-dimensional, but it has a potential to have a significant detrimental impact on the most disadvantaged, vulnerable, and marginalized at local, national, and global levels. We want our students to have an awareness of what social responsibility means. So how the law shapes the way in which we view and understand the world and represents an important influence in addressing societal challenges. We want them to understand the interrelationship between ethical conduct and legal rules, and that this is both complex and contestable. And we want them to graduate with an understanding of a distinction between what can or cannot be done as distinct to what should or should not be done. Graduates should be aware that the law does not operate in a vacuum. The law is intertwined with political, social, and economic powerful issues, and there's an inherent social bias within these structures. We want the graduates to have a contextual appreciation of the law at a micro level, its impact upon specific individuals, and to take account of this humanistic nature of law, humanistic nature which Raj talked about, and an understanding of the human side of law beyond the legal rules. We hope that the graduates will have had multiple opportunities to work collectively and collaboratively, to share perspectives, support each other, and build constructive relationships. I know I was against time, so I've pretty much rushed through that to try and get us to 15 minutes. I'm pretty much there, so at that point I'll say thank you for listening and give opportunity for you to ask questions to any of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Jen, it was amazing. I think you were about to say, like I was too, but I'll let you say it, and then we'll talk about this next final section. It was amazing, wasn't it, Jen?
It was absolutely perfect to time it. And if I may, Julian, just to go into the questions, it's really struck me that across 3 rich, diverse, incredible case studies, the key themes of reflection and knowledge and understanding and critique and value come through time and time again. What an amazing set of examples. Sorry, I will hand over to you now, Julian. Go on, go for it.
It's amazing. So I was just wondering if the person operating our technical screens can put us all together for this last section and take the slide down. I wanted to, it's really nice to see everybody. Hello again. I just wanted to read out some comments in the chat because you've been busy presenting to my colleagues, and I wasn't embarrassed by saying which person they might have been referring to. But one said, very inspiring and moving presentation. Somebody else said, thank you for this powerful and informative overview. And then another one, very impressive. I can't imagine how much effort Manchester's put in to embedding SR into the curriculum. So rather than me say anything, I just thought I'd feed that back because that was really powerful when you put that together. It really was a greatest hits of University of Manchester, teaching and learning at the cutting edge of social responsibility. Really amazing. What I'm going to do now, we can see the countdown, I think, on our slide. I can anyway, saying 13 minutes. I'm really determined to get through. I've got 6 or 7 questions, so it's quite ambitious. So bear that in mind, do the maths, less than 2 minutes per answer. And the last question is going to ask you for something which I'm going to say will take 30 seconds each as well to finish on a high. The first thing, I did have one specific question which came up in the chat, which I'm going to put to Jen, actually. And it came from Ayama, and it was a really good question. And I thought you'd be good, best place to answer this, Jen, given you're a geographer and you really think about the global north, the global south in your teaching. So the question was, while developed countries are taking a lead in promoting SDGs worldwide, how can this concept be adapted to developing countries through education in consideration of their social and cultural context? So Jen, what did you think to that?
It's a wonderful question. If I may, I'm going to push back on it a little bit slightly because I'm not actually sure that developed countries or the global north are leading on the Sustainable Development Goals. It took me a lot longer than I'm comfortable to admit to appreciate that the SDGs are a way of thinking and a way of being, as well as a set of targets. So they are pitched as a blueprint for a better world by 2030. And for me, they are as much something that you do or you can be, as well as a set of targets to aim for. So I talk a lot about using the SDGs as pedagogy, for example, of working together in these mutually beneficial, respective partnerships, of leaving nobody behind and ultimately affecting change. And I think that's where the SDGs are as applicable to any space. I mean, they're supposed to be accessible from Manchester to Malawi through to Milan and Moscow, and I'm running out of alliteration here. But it's very much then about setting your expectations of what the SDGs are or could be. And in that respect, I think everyone comes together. Forgive me, I'm mindful of time. This is a lifetime's worth of work that I'm trying to share with you here, but I'm working at the moment with scholars across the global south. And what's truly fascinating to me is we have these interactive discussions with University of Manchester students, and we're all coming at these from different angles. We are reflecting differently on priorities, and yet we're all driven to action to affect change. And it comes back to setting those targets personally in your own scale and space. Forgive me, potted answer given the time, but if I can talk more offline, I'm very happy to do that.
Thanks, Jen. And we've got a few more questions in, and I'm just going to think about the best order. I'd like to ask Jackie the next question. And And this question is, we talk a lot about research impact, Jackie, and we know a lot about this. We have the REF in the UK, and it's actually quite famous around the world, the REF, the way it's brought impact into the measurement of what excellent research looks like. So why don't we do that with teaching impact, do you think?
Oh gosh, that's a big question, isn't it? I think we do, but I don't think we do it in the same way. Okay. You know, what's your definition of impact? The REFs is very, so for those who don't know, we have this impact framework in the UK where you have to achieve a certain level to be able to sort of reflect well on the research that you're doing. I think we do. I think teaching's harder. Okay, so my honest answer to that is I think teaching is harder because it is about changing lives. And I think all three presentations today and the overview that Jen gave at the University of Manchester demonstrates that. Absolutely, you know, we're committed to giving our students the best opportunity, but to measure that is hard. Okay, so as somebody who teaches about measurement and how difficult it is to measure inequalities, for example, it's hard to measure the impact. And if you remember on my presentation, I gave an impact that's 5 years hence. You know, so somebody who did their data fellowship, 7 years hence, so he did his data fellowship back in 2015, and it's only because I've kept in touch with him that I know what he is doing now, and that he's taking our students now and he's helping give back and change lives, and that's, we've developed that virtuous circle. And because we don't systematically collect that type of information, it's hard to show what the impact of teaching is. I know myself, because I've got a National Teaching Fellowship, that I have affected lives. I used to be a school teacher before I was a scholar and an academic. And I'm still in touch with somebody who I taught maths when he was in high school. And he's now an academic at the University of Manchester. And I know I had an effect on his life. I mean, probably every single one of us sitting here and every person listening will be able to think of a teacher who has affected their life and perhaps changed.
So ironically, as a data scientist, then what you're saying is you need qualitative data for this, Jackie, don't you, to capture some of this? I think it's absolutely true that some of these case studies you need, and that's the nature of your book, I know, where, you know, obviously you're passionate about data, but really to capture some of this impact, you have to, you can't have a piece of data that will say this person's helped to change the world for the better 12 years later. It's impossible. You can only do this through case studies. And I think if you're interested in looking at some wonderful case studies, do look at Jackie's book, because it does exactly that. It takes that qualitative approach. I wanted to ask now a question to Raj about something that struck me, certainly listening to these presentations, is the local and the global. You know, and to you, Raj, from a dental perspective, is one more important than the other, or are they both important?
No, I think it's the first, I think, Julian, I think, come to about the earlier discussion about SR. SR, in my opinion, need to be owned rather than to be taught, in a sense. The SR, that's one of the difficulty in teaching, isn't it? So that's why I think we create the environment for the students to develop their own way, my environmental sustainability work in my life. So so I think it's the global and the local is both important, because for a city like Manchester is a global city already, Julian. There are so many different, I think we are representing almost all the parts of the world. So whether you work in Manchester or you work in somewhere around the world, I think you're probably pitching or approaching the same thing. So, but when you go around the world, that's where binary teaching become three-dimensional, or more than 3-dimensional, because the students understand how the world works. Because, for an example, I mentioned before, say in caries, we say, or diabetes, we say sugar causes diabetes or sugar causes caries. So that's a binary teaching, isn't it? If you cut down the sugar, your caries will get better. So that is the two-dimensional things we get in the classrooms. But when they go into the community, like Manchester, Cartridge community, they understand how difficult to cut down the sugar, because the economical situation, the behaviors, the attitude. So that's trigger critical thinking. That's trigger and also the learning dimension. So that's why the environment or community is much more important than sometimes classroom teaching. So it's need emotional attachment to the intellectual learning is very important. I think all three, I mean, all the studies show it today, actually, case studies. The emotional attachment is very important. So that's why it's whether it's in the global. I think the problem is everybody can't go global because of the economic situations and things. That's why we need to set up projects in the local. Manchester, ideal place because Manchester reflects most of the global situation.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. And I could imagine going off in loads of directions with that one example of sugar, who makes it, where does it come from, the economics, the legal system, how you capture data on it. You can pick a topic, and I think all of you could teach it in an amazing way with the wealth of experience we've got at Manchester. I wanted to move to Phil. I wanted to pick up something you said, reminded me of one of the favourite quotes I learned as an undergraduate when I was studying about the philosophy of Marx rather than his more economic work. And he said, philosophers who interpret the world miss the point. The point of the world is to change it. Something like that, I paraphrase. And you said that about law. He said it's not just about understanding the law or understanding the world, it's about where the law is deficient and where we may need to change things. And it struck me that one of the dilemmas you and I have talked about before, and anybody that works in service learning will think about, is, are our students having to step into situations, whether that's in a dental context with Raj, or a data context with Jackie, or a sustainability context with Jen, but just for you in a legal context, having to step in to do things, picking up where the government's not funding things, and then students getting really good experience from that. But actually, there's something wrong about that probably as well, we would all agree. So how do you get students to be critical when they're undertaking practice in contexts that may be reproducing inequalities in that very context? How do you handle that with students? Because it's quite a challenge, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there is a big argument that students doing pro bono work undermines arguments about legal aid being returned to legal aid. The sad situation in the UK is that certainly in the next couple of years, in the immediate future, I cannot see us returning back to the position that we were with legal aid previously. So you're left with the position whether you just try and highlight it, like by letting people fall down and letting terrible things happen to people because they don't have legal aid, or try to do something about it. And student legal advice centres, but they can't replace legal aid. We don't even, we don't even touch the sides, like with regards to the massive gap that there is there. But what we can do is by getting students to assist, the individuals who can't get any legal aid, not only are they learning about the law, but they're learning about the unfairness of the law. They're learning about how politics are influencing and making this deprived communities and impacting on them so detrimentally, so that when we get graduates from leaving Manchester, they actually care. They want to do something. They want to bring change. They want to, address what's happening. And I always use an analogy with the students is that, with this, students helping people pro bono, as in contrast to legal aid, and they do get involved in campaigning as well, for political campaigning with the Greater Manchester Law Centre. But my analogy is, you let somebody hanging off the edge of a cliff drop off to highlight how bad the people are who put in there, or do you help them try to get them back up again? And that's the position.
I think it's a really good point. Thanks for that, Phil. It's really complex area and so worthy of far more time than we've got. I wanted to finish with, so I'm going to ask each of you, and you put your hand up if you want to go first. 20 seconds, 2 sentences. Yeah, tell me, because look at the theme above our heads here: education and action for a sustainable future. I'd like, because this is about education, can you think of something inspiring, a person, a student you've taught that's done something to create a more sustainable future, and why? So tell me what they did and why it's so inspiring to create a sustainable future. Hands up, if you can just call out an example. And it'd be lovely to share these with the actual students maybe, because this is being recorded. So something that's inspired you, that you've seen a person do. Phil, go on.
I did some research with some of our alumni, similar to Jackie, where we had a focus group and we talked about it. And what came out in a research focus group, I know I've got 20 seconds, I better hurry up, was they described me as like the Eye of Sauron, from Lord of the Rings. But whenever they were tempted to do anything unethical or socially irresponsible, it was like they felt that I was watching down on them.
There you go.
No, I'm not going to
Thanks
do
a
it.
lot,
So
Phil.
anyway,
Jackie,
I'm
go
sorry.
on. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got one. I can't remember her name, but she went to work in a food bank, a Greater Manchester food bank, as part of her data fellowship. And it inspired her so much that it has developed what she's now gone into. And she's absolutely changing the world, you know, but she's doing it from a place of passion and critical appraisal, but she's out there doing it. So she's putting her education into action.
Thanks. Raj, have you got anything? And then I'll finish up with Jen. We're not going to get cut off, by the way. This is just, so we're
Yes,
almost
I'll
at
briefly. I
Raj.
think one of the students involved in the social responsibility, really committed. And then he went for an interview in London to get a fellowship in Harvard. There are so many competition. I think he was selected on this particular social responsibility project and then went into a short fellowship to Harvard. So that's really how our work is recognized by the global institutions.
Thanks, Raj. And Jen, please.
For me, it's Emin Hussein, who was my student partner intern. She was the first person in her family ever to go to university. She helped me research accessibility for student learning through online learning in the pandemic, research that she presented at the Higher Education Academy, and it got her her fellowship, and research that we are using to frame our flexible and blended learning policies going forward.
Thanks very much, Jen. So I'd like to bring this to a conclusion now. First of all, by thanking all the panelists, and particularly Jen for coordinating all of this and making sure we all turned up at the right time zone with the right Zoom link and things. So thank you very much for that. I want to thank our colleagues at the USR network as well for organising an amazing conference over the last 3 days. I've not been able to see as much as I wanted to, but it's all getting recorded and there's some wonderful sessions in there, which I'm looking forward to learning from. I think the theme of education and action for a sustainable future, we've just had COP27. In the view of all of us, I'm sure I speak for everyone, not enough of that spoke about the role of universities, not just research but of students. And if we're going to change the world for the better, our future citizens, our future leaders who are studying at university at the moment, that's perhaps the most significant way in which universities can have a positive impact on the world. And it's why universities are so important, and this is why we're also passionate about coming and speaking about these things, which has been a big theme for the whole conference. So let's ensure that we can all learn from each other to advance the role of universities in creating a better future, something we're also passionate about at this conference. So without further ado, then I'd like to bring this to a close just by thanking everybody and saying that I hope you enjoy catching up on many other sessions around the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.